Movement is a feature of all living organisms. Even if there's no obvious outward movement, the contents of individual cells are constantly moving. But not all organisms show locomotion. Locomotion is the movement of an organism from one place to another. Most animals show locomotion, and so do some of the smaller algae, and the male sex cells of some plants. Amoeba is a microscopic animal that lives on the mud at the bottom of ponds and ditches, where it literally streams across the surface. The cytoplasm flows into finger-like projections called pseudopodia. These extend in the direction of movement and are withdrawn from the back of the animal as it moves forward. It can change direction by putting out pseudopodia to one side or the other. Notice how the cytoplasm is clear and jelly-like near the surface. This layer is called the ectoplasm. Further in, the cytoplasm is more watery and full of granules and is called endoplasm. In the parts of the cell that are flowing, the ectoplasm turns into the more liquid endoplasm. And at the newly formed edges of the growing pseudopodium, the endoplasm turns back into ectoplasm. Other one-celled organisms swim using a special whip-like structure called a flagellum. These are human sperm. Each flagellum beats with a wave-like motion. As each wave forms, the sides of the wave push the water sideways and backwards, so propelling the cell forwards. You can see this happening if the sperm's movement is slowed down. The sperm moves forward head first, with the flagellum pushing from behind. This bacterium also uses a flagellum with a wave-like action. In some flagellates, the flagellum goes first, pulling the organism along. This uses the same principle as the sperm flagellum. A few algae, like Euglena, have a flagellum that is attached at the front of the cell, but trails behind it to propel it along. This flagellum beats in a spiral, so that Euglena move in a corkscrew path, rotating as they go. By altering its shape at the same time, Euglena can change its direction of movement. Some unicells have rows of shorter whips called cilia, which beat in a coordinated fashion. These are called ciliates. Paramecium is covered in parallel rows of beating cilia, which are used to move it along. In these moving paramecia, you can see the rows of cilia beating. Each cilium beats rather like an oar. On the downstroke, the cilium is outstretched to push the water backwards. On the upstroke, it's bent so it doesn't act as a brake. Stentor, a relative of Paramecium, shows how the cilia in a particular row beat one after the other, so that a rhythmic wave of beats passes along the animal. Some quite large animals use cilia. These are comb jellies. But cilia are not powerful enough to give fast movement. That's possible only for animals which use muscle power, like the pulsating jellyfish. Most soft-bodied invertebrates rely on muscles for movement. Hydra's body wall contains a layer of muscle fibers running the length of the animal and another layer running around its circumference. Contraction of the circular layer makes the animal long and thin, and contraction of the longitudinal fibers makes it short and fat. If the muscle fibers on only one side contract, the animal bends towards that side. This is how the tentacles manage to curl around prey. Their close relatives, the jellyfish, rhythmically contract their bells to propel themselves along by a form of jet propulsion, shooting water backwards out of the bell to push themselves forwards. The earthworm's body is filled with fluid. The pressure of the fluid against the body wall gives the worm its shape. This is called a hydrostatic skeleton. Like the hydra, it has longitudinal and circular muscles. As the circular muscles contract, the fluid inside can't be compressed, so the segment becomes long and thin. And as the longitudinal muscles contract, it becomes short and fat. Waves of lengthening and shortening pass along the worm as it moves forward. Stretch and contract, stretch and contract. On the underside are stiff bristles called chaetae. As the worm's body touches the ground, it sticks out these chaetae, which catch on irregularities on the soil and stop the worm sliding backwards as it draws the rear segments forward. Ragworms, which are also segmented worms, creep about the seabed while the tide is in, using rows of flap-like parapodia on each side as paddles. Starfish use a sophisticated hydraulic system to creep over the rocks on hundreds of tiny tube feet. A series of canals carries water along each arm and into the tube feet. Armed with powerful suckers, the feet are extended and retracted by muscles as they step over the rock. Or in this case, the glass. The arthropods are probably the most successful group of invertebrates on Earth. They can walk, jump, and fly. The key to this versatility is the rigid external skeleton of chitin, with its many joints operated by pairs of muscles. At each joint, the tough exoskeleton, or cuticle, is thinner and more flexible. Each leg is like a tube down which the muscles run. Each muscle is attached to the next section of the leg just beneath the joint. The flexor muscle contracts to bend the limb, while the extensor relaxes. To straighten the limb, the extensor contracts, while the flexor relaxes. There are two ways to move fast. You can have short legs and move them very quickly, or you can have long legs and move them slowly. By using legs to lift the body off the ground, friction with the ground is reduced and locomotion is easier. This is carried to an extreme by jumping. The work of pushing off from the ground is done by the hind legs, which are much longer and stronger than the others. The master jumper is the flea, which can jump over 130 times its own height. Other arthropods are even better at using the air for transport. Most adult insects have two pairs of wings attached to the thorax. In insects with large wings, muscles are attached directly to the wings and flap them up and down, as well as twisting them to change direction. In insects with smaller wings, the wings are attached directly to the thorax and can be moved very rapidly. Some insects, such as flies, have only one pair of wings. Arthropods are equally at home underwater. Some swim by jet propulsion, flexing their abdomens to shoot water forwards and propel themselves backwards. Others have stiff bristles on their legs which can be fanned out to form oars to row them through the water, like this water boatman. But for all their versatility, the types of locomotion used by the arthropods work only for small animals. If their exoskeletons grew any larger, it would be difficult to lift the body off the ground. Vertebrates have an internal bony skeleton which can be moved at the joints by means of muscles. The vertebrates evolved in the sea, where their bodies were well supported by the water. But water is 800 times denser than air, and moving it takes a lot of effort. A fish's muscles can make up more than half its body weight. Flexing the backbone is the simplest way of swimming. Opposite blocks of muscle work against each other. While muscles on one side contract, those on the other side relax, and the body bends to one side. As waves of alternate contraction and relaxation pass along both sides of the fish, its body flexes from side to side. As the body bends to one side, it pushes outward and backwards against the water, thrusting it aside. Since it bends first to one side and then to the other, it keeps a straight course. This kind of swimming is called undulation. Because the head end of a fish is less flexible, the movements are greatest at the tail end, which provides most of the force for swimming. Really fast-moving fish rely on tail power. Only a few fish have such stiff bodies that they have to rely almost entirely on their fins for movement. Fins are fan-shaped structures made of webs of skin supported by bony rays. Each ray is attached to the spinal column by a joint and has its own set of muscles. When the muscles are contracted in a series of waves, the fin undulates, and this can be used to propel the fish along. Most fish also use their fins to help them keep stable and to adjust the direction in which they're swimming. The tail fin is important for providing thrust and also acts as a rudder. The vertical fins act as stabilizers, while the paired fins keep the fish horizontal and are also used in braking and back paddling. Rays and skates rely entirely on undulations of huge pectoral fins for swimming, flapping up and down rather than from side to side. Plaice and flounders may swim rather like rays, but in fact it's their bodies, not their fins, which are large and flattened. They are really swimming on their sides. Marine mammals also swim by up and down undulation. Their tail flukes are flattened horizontally, not vertically like those of fish, so they're very effective at pushing the water up and down. Some fish are even able to take to the air for a few seconds to escape from predators. But they could never travel far on land, as they have no means of lifting their bodies off the ground. Amphibians and reptiles evolved from fish ancestors, and their movements still show traces of this origin. How about this newt as an example of swimming by undulation? Even when walking on land, frogs and salamanders use the same swimming action, twisting from side to side as they go. This happens because diagonally opposite legs move at almost the same time. The legs stick out so far sideways that they can't lift the body far off the ground. Frogs swim in a very different way from fish. Their feet are webbed, and when they spread their toes, there's a large surface area for pushing back the water. Both legs work together to give a jerky kind of swimming, the frog kick method. And as the legs are brought forwards, the toes close up so they don't push the frog backwards again. The short front legs are used for steering. The long, powerful back legs not only provide the thrust for swimming, they are also good for jumping, which has saved many a frog and toad from a hungry predator. The limb bones act as levers pivoting at the joints, operated by pairs of muscles which move them in opposite directions. The hind legs can be folded up, ready to spring, by flexor muscles acting on joints of the knee and the ankle. As the frog leaps, the extensor muscles contract very rapidly to straighten the legs. The legs exert a force on the ground which thrusts the frog upwards. The reptiles have also evolved to move on land, but when in the water they still swim much as their ancestors did, undulating their bodies from side to side, using their feet to help when swimming slowly, but folding them flat against the body when moving fast. Only the turtles swim differently. You can't undulate a shell. They use their legs as hydrofoils, beating the water downwards and backwards as they swim. On land, crocodiles and lizards wiggle as they walk, and, like the frogs, their legs don't prop them up too well. The snake skeleton has about 200 ribs attached by muscles to scales on its belly. These muscles can push the scales into the ground to anchor various points of the body as the snake moves. The simplest way of moving is to make S-shaped waves pass along the body, pushing against irregularities on the ground and gripping with the scales on its belly, so that as the curves pass backwards, the snake is thrust forwards. In concertina locomotion, the snake presses its coils sideways against objects to anchor itself as it stretches its head forward. This method works well for climbing trees, pushing against ridges in the bark. Birds beware. Some snakes can travel in a straight line, using waves of muscle action to dig their bellies into the ground as they move. But the strangest movement of all is that of the sidewinder of the hot American deserts. Only 2 points on its body touch the sand at any one moment, so its belly never gets too hot. The strange tracks are made as the belly scales push into the sand as it thrusts forward. Even in the most difficult situations, there are ways of moving. The most successful animals on dry land are the warm-blooded birds and mammals. Only the birds and the bats have really mastered the air. Both evolved from four-footed ancestors whose forelimbs became modified to support wings. The wing has to act as a lifting surface for pushing the animal up and as a propeller for pushing the animal forward. But there's more to flight than just flapping. On the downbeat, the wing starts off with the front edge slightly below the back edge, so it pushes the air backwards, thrusting the bird forwards as well as upwards. Then it twists at the wrist to bring the front edge up as it starts the upstroke. On the upbeat, the wing is folded to offer less resistance to the air, and the feathers separate so the air can flow between them to avoid pushing the bird down again. Feathers are just about the strongest structures known for their weight. Different feathers serve different purposes. The secondaries provide the lifting force, and the primaries the backward push. The shape of the wing, with a convex upper surface and a concave lower surface, makes it a good aerofoil. The shape of an aerofoil disturbs the airflow over the wing to produce lift under the wing. Higher pressure under the wing pushes it up, while lower pressure above it pulls it up. You can see the feathers being sucked upwards by the reduced pressure above the wing. Flapping isn't the only way to fly. These birds are soaring on spiralling up currents of air due to the uneven warming of the land. Thermals. Although the bird's weight causes it to sink, the air is rising faster than the bird is sinking, so the bird rises too. The albatross is the world's master glider. It makes good use of wind deflected upwards over ocean waves. But first you have to get airborne. Perching birds can just flap their wings and jump. But large birds have to get up speed by running and flapping at the same time. Landing can be just as difficult. The pigeon angles its wings upwards so that they push forwards against the air to brake, and can control its descent until it finds just the right place to land. The techniques used for landing can be used to hover. Only the hummingbirds have really mastered the art of hovering, beating their wings up to 50 times a second. The wings do a sort of figure of 8, so that they generate lift equally on both forward and backward strokes. Besides flying, birds can walk, run, and swim. Sometimes they paddle along the surface, sometimes they dive and swim underwater, rowing with their webbed feet. Penguins swim with their wings instead. Even on land, some birds excel. The ostrich is one of the world's high-speed runners. Walking appears to be simply a case of putting one foot in front of the other. But how does swinging your legs move you forward? The foot and leg act as a series of levers. The push of the foot against the ground generates an equal thrust in the opposite direction, which can be analysed into a forward component and an upward component. See how these runners bounce forward and up as each foot pushes off against the ground. But it's not as simple as this. it's easier than you think to fall flat on your face, even with 4 legs. In slow walking, the dog keeps its centre of gravity safely between the triangle of 3 legs still on the ground. As walking speeds up, this becomes less important, as the dog doesn't spend long enough in any one position to overbalance. And at really high speeds, all 4 feet come down at different times. There's no trace left of the supporting tripod. Galloping horses can have all 4 feet off the ground at the same time. The cheetah is the fastest mammal on Earth, reaching speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. Look how the spine flexes as it runs, helping to bring the hind legs further and further forwards, then curving the other way to give the front legs maximum reach. There's another factor in the cheetah's racing success. It walks on only the tips of its feet. Hoofed mammals have carried this to an extreme. At these higher speeds, the tendons joining the muscles to the bones become important. As the foot hits the ground, the tendon stretches, storing elastic energy. As the ankle straightens out again, this energy is released to bounce the horse forwards on its next step. When we run, we use this energy to lift us completely off the ground, which gives us a much longer stride. Jumping animals make even more use of this energy. Kangaroos are rather like living pogo sticks. The tendons also function as shock absorbers. Without this dramatic bending of the fetlocks, the horse's leg joints would be damaged by the shock of landing. Many animals can climb, but balancing becomes tricky when branches are moving or are too thin to take the weight. Some have found themselves an extra limb, the tail. Their feet are adapted for gripping branches by having an opposable thumb. Watch these lemurs in action. You can afford to take chances if you can grab a branch as easily as this. The real masters of the treetops use arm power rather than leg power, using a good swing to get up enough momentum to go from tree to tree. How's this for sheer exuberance? Locomotion can be fun.